We had a really positive meeting, and I think one of the takeaways is that the Prime Minister and we as the Premiers agreed to start meeting again on a regular basis, just given everything that's going on.
I thought it was a positive meeting. We talked about the budget, which was positive, an announcement on steel and softwood lumber that affects Ontario in a big way. He'll be addressing that over the next week or so.
Of course, we talked about softwood lumber, so I was pleased to hear Prime Minister Carney state that a new package is coming that he described as significant.
I said that the federal government needs to be relentless and remorseless in pushing for economic growth wherever they can find it. I thank the Prime Minister for taking the approach of doing exactly that.
All right, joining me now is Tony Wakeham. He is the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador. Premier Wakeham, it's good to see you again. Thank you for joining us, sir.
I'm glad to be here.
Do you share the positive reviews from that meeting today that we just heard from your counterparts in the other provinces? What's your takeaway from it?
Firstly, it was my first meeting as Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador with the Prime Minister and all the premiers, and I was honored to be able to represent Newfoundland and Labrador, and it was a good meeting. What I really liked about it, David, as you heard from all the clips, is that the Prime Minister allowed each of us to take the time to talk about the things that were important to our own provinces, as well as the general discussion on the entire country.
Right, but did he give you a sense in any way? Did the Prime Minister explain to you or the other premiers how things are maybe moving on the big Canada-US file, if they're any closer to restarting talks, or is it truly as stalled as it seems from the outside?
I think there's always talks that are ongoing. Obviously, the Prime Minister is not going to share them publicly at this time, I wouldn't think. He's obviously working hard to try to get that resolved. We did talk about U.S. tariffs. We also talked about the Chinese tariffs, which have had an impact on the province of Newfoundland and Labrador in terms of our fishery.
Right, and did you get a sense of whether there's any hope of movement, maybe before the end of the year? I know we heard from a lot of the premiers there, certainly Premier Canoe, Mr. Wakeham, that this needs to start happening a little bit more regularly because there has been some complaints about an information deficit. I mean, how frequently do you think you will be getting updates from the Prime Minister on where things are?
Well, that's one of the things the Prime Minister committed to doing. Obviously, the budget was brought down. There's a lot of details that we'd like to find out about the budget. A lot of discussion around nation-building projects. So I took the opportunity to talk about one of the things, a project that's already started, ongoing, and that's the Beta Nor development. And there are things that the federal government could do to make sure that project goes ahead, which would bring billions of dollars of investment to Canada and our province. Things like the emission cap, which they talked about the elimination of in the budget, but also the Atlantic Investment Tax Credit, which is another part of that. So those are things that are important to us. The Atlantic Fisheries Fund is due to expire at the end of March. There was no mention of that in the budget. That has a significant impact on our province and was also mentioned by New Brunswick.
Right. Sorry, Premier. I just wanted to ask you a follow-up on the Beta Nord question that you raised there. And for people not from home, that this is the next potential offshore oil development in very deep water off the continental shelf. The Norwegian company Equinor is the proponent there. But your predecessor, former Premier Hogan, was looking for the reintroduction or the inclusion in that project in a tax write-down program that would essentially help get them to the point where they could maybe go ahead with sanction, if I'm not mischaracterizing it. Did you get any clarity and certainty on that? Because I think it's next month, Equinor has to make a decision on whether or not to move to the next stage of that particular project.
And that's what I just talked about, the Atlantic Investment Tax Credit that could be available. That would make a significant difference. Because when we talk about nation-building projects, again, as I just said, that is a project that's already in the works that could easily be turn around and inject billions of dollars of investment in Canada and our province. And so, yeah, we wanted to make sure that project is front and center. Defense spending is obviously a big announcement in the budget to talk about the increase in that. We have the facilities, we have the workforce, we have the resources, and as a country, if we're going to engage in nation-building projects and defense spending is part of that, then we would expect that Newfoundland and Labrador would be part of that spend as well.
But did you get any answers on those things today, Premier Wakeham, in terms of a yes or a no, or we'll look into it, or did you just get a chance to raise it in terms of whether the ball got moved?
Exactly. Today was about going around, doing a roundtable discussion, and everybody talking about what was of some of the challenges that we raised. I'm looking forward to going to Ottawa, actually. I've spoken with the Minister of Fisheries, Ms. Thompson, and talked to her about setting up a meeting with the Prime Minister, because I think it's important for us to be able to go up and talk to various ministers to talk about these important issues.
Okay. One thing I was wondering about, Premier, is that the hydro project with Newfoundland, Labrador, and Quebec was not referenced on the list of major projects that came out last week from the Prime Minister in the run-up to the Grey Cup. I know you have been skeptical of the deal negotiated by the previous Liberal government and want to put this to a review and a referendum. But I know Quebec's energy minister was in town today for meetings you hosted with the Atlantic premiers and the Eastern Canadian governors. Are you going to sit down and start negotiations with Quebec at any point to see what you can get in parallel to the reviews, or is nothing going to happen on the hydro deals until you've finished your own processes?
Oh, I had a meeting with the minister from Quebec after the conference ended. We had a big conversation, and there's things that we're going to do. As you know, I've committed to the independent review of this deal, and it's something that should have been done back in January. It didn't get done, but we're committed to doing that. At the same time, you know, we had a good conversation today about mutual interests and what we can do.
Okay, but the clock may be running out on the government in Quebec, right? As you know, they've got an election in 2026. Things don't look good for Premier Legault and his colleagues right now. So will you use the time you have to start a renegotiation, or are you intent on just have the review process done first?
Well, the whole intention here is there's lots of things we could talk about that are non-binding, that negotiations continue to go between Newfoundland Hydro and Hydro-Quebec on non-binding parts of that whole agreement. But for me, it's very important. We're talking about not just about an election here. We're talking about signing an agreement potentially for 40 or 50 years that will have a significant impact on the people in Newfoundland and Labrador. And I'm going to make sure we take the time to get it right.
Okay, well, one final question, Premier, if I can. You hosted the governors, the New England governors and Eastern Canadian premiers today. Republican Vermont Governor Phil Scott was there. Did he give you any insight into, as a Republican, into whether they believe tariffs are there to stay? Because I know they want Canadian tourists to come back, and people aren't going to do that until the tariffs go away. Well, what insight did you gain from your meeting with the governors and the premiers today?
Governor Scott was very clear on his messaging about the impacts of tariffs on Canada and U.S. He's totally against the tariffs. He's a Republican who actually voted against the tariffs, and he stands firm that tariffs are not something that we should be talking about between friends. He thinks that there's a way forward for this, and he's hopeful that and he wants to continue to make sure that we continue to have that relationships. We had great conversations today. We talked about innovation strategy. We talked about all of those things. We talked about potential energy quarters or projects around with New England as well. And,
Right, but did he give you a sense, Premier, on whether or not he thinks tariffs are here to stay or not, or does he think it's it's a temporary measure, or it's there as long as Donald Trump is there?
Well, again, that he was almost apologetic.
Yeah, a lot of that
for the tariffs that are being imposed on Canada at the time. But I think for him, in his state of Vermont, he wants to make sure that all of us in Canada know that Vermont is open for business. They would love for Canadians to come back to Vermont from a tourist perspective. And we'll continue to build those relationships and talk about deals, trade deals that we can do, independent of what may or may not be happening in Washington.
Okay, Premier Tony Wakeham, First Ministers meeting, Eastern Governors, Atlantic Premiers. Thanks for squeezing us in here on Power and Politics on a busy day. As Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, Tony Wakeham. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, David.